She will find you.
While playing at Columbia Premier Theaters.
You looking for a room?
No, I'm not looking for a room. I'm desperate for a room. Now, if you turn me away, I'm going to have to sleep on the beach tonight. Please, please.
Will you hear what I got on Victoria Engels?
Let's have it.
Okay, after she tried to hack up her boyfriend, she tried to commit suicide. She blew that too. Court ordered her institutionalized.
Oh, yeah?
That's right. They had her locked up for 3 years. Finally, she got so violent, they had to take a knife to her.
We don't have a murder weapon. We don't have any witnesses. We don't have a motive. The only thing we got's a body.
Hello? Hey, Mason, you seen Scotty? Hey, what's going on?
Hey, this is Robert Russler. I play Ron Grady in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, and you're listening to The Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. Welcome back to The Hysteria Continues. I think this is episode 328, if my maths is correct. And this time, some of you probably know Erik isn't with us anymore. Not that he's dead, as far as we know. He's still in that Turkish prison. But we have an exchange student with us. In fact, the best kind of exchange student. A very big friend of the show and a very popular guest. Amanda Reyes is joining us for Silent Scream. Amanda, delighted as always to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I like the idea of the exchange student thing. It adds kind of a teen sex comedy element to your show.
I kind of the idea of sex comedy going on in the Turkish prison. I'm trying to scrub those mental images out of my brain.
The idea of a sex comedy going on with any of you guys is like I'm trying to scrub from my brain. So, you excluded Amanda. Sorry.
It's okay.
Well, I'm not sure how you take that, Amanda. Really?
Yeah, but with the three of you, you've got the perfect mixing.
I was talking about Erik, but he's not here.
But you guys, with just the three of you, the trio is perfect for Last American Virgin.
That is true, but that's got a very downbeat ending, though, hasn't it?
It does, but I can fit in a number of roles there. I could either be, the girl that stars in it that everybody's in love with, or I could be the girl that says, "My little buddy, toe." You just pick one.
Well, the good thing that Erik's not here because he prefers a happy ending. So I hear. So, okay. Well, great to have you, Amanda, with us because I'm sure you're going to bring a fantastic, your thoughts on this movie. I know it was kind of my pick, but as our special guest, you chose this. And it's kind of one of the few late 70s, early 80s kind of slasher adjacent movies that we've not covered on the podcast in the many hundreds of years since we've been doing it. So I'm going to be really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on why you picked it coming up. And also, obviously, we're talking a little bit about what we've been watching recently. But I'd say a quick hello to Nathan and Joseph. So this Silent Scream is kind of like one of the few, isn't it? I think there's a few others, isn't it? Nathan, I'm surprised you haven't picked The Forest yet.
We've covered The Forest.
Did we? Oh, God,
it goes yes.
so back.
The thing is, I was thinking about this recently, and I'm like, we have done so much that I really need to, compile lists of all the Patreons we've done, all the shows. That way, when I'm thinking of one, I don't have to go searching to find out if we've covered it or not.
Yeah, well, we've managed not to, so far anyway, to actually start recording a show and realise we've already done it before. So at least a couple of us have got good memories.
Lace.
Well, Blood and Black Lace. Well, yes, Erik's kind of his Mandela moment, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, okay, well, what's his name? Oh, Erik. Yes, sorely missed. But he will be back next time, I'm sure, if that exchange program goes to plan.
He better be. It's his pick, and he's picked a Nathan-style movie.
Oh, okay.
I'm excited.
I'm not surprised. So, well, let's have a quick chat about what we've been watching recently. So, Amanda, is there anything you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I think I actually picked two films to watch that maybe you guys haven't covered yet. I recently watched Future Kill, which is a 1985 kind of dystopian, again, slasher adjacent sort of amalgamation of a bunch of different genres that was shot here in Austin, Texas. And it's probably most famous for the H.R. Geiger artwork on the video cover, which doesn't really represent the film. And also because it reunites Marilyn Burns and Edwin Neal. from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He plays a character named Splatter. I can't remember her character's name, but they come from this kind of anti-nuclear activism. And so it starts off as like a teen frat comedy. And then they get some sort of like pledge thing that they have to do. I don't remember if it's pledging or just something that they have to do while they're at this party. And they show up, I guess, in downtown Austin. And downtown Austin's been taken over by all these anti-nuclear activists who wear a lot of kind of funky new wave face paint and go about, protesting and stuff. And they're generally nonviolent, except this guy Splatter had been somehow affected by some kind of like nuclear radiation, and it's disfigured him and it's made him really angry. So in the style of Warriors, he commits a murder to kill the guy who started the movement and then blame it on these frat boys. So then the frat kids have to get out of downtown Austin in one piece. And so it's kind of their adventure. And I really like this movie. I've seen it a couple of times. I rewatched it just because I thought it was shot in Houston, and a friend of mine here who is a programmer at Austin Film Society was like, no, that's completely done in Austin. I can't tell because it's almost all downtown in the 80s, but it captures a really great kind of vibe, and they picked a perfect location. And one of my favorite parts about the film is that I think that they didn't have enough script. So they have a full performance from this local band called Max and the Makeups, who had a song called Xerox, which was kind of a hit here in Austin. And they're such a terrific new wave band. And you can watch them online. There's a video for that song. I don't think the video really captures their stage presence, but the concert performance in the middle of the film does. Everybody's great in it, particularly Edwin Neal. His outfit is great. You would not believe that he's the hitchhiker, because the hitchhiker is like a menacing figure in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I wouldn't say he looks really imposing. And in this, with the way they have him made up with all the metal kind of outfitry, is like really great. And he's really creepy in it. And it's just a really fun film. And I don't know, I think Joe's seen this film because I remember you talking about it once on one of the Fangoria flashbacks, but I don't know if everybody here's seen it or what their thoughts are.
Yeah, it's AKA Splatterpunks, isn't it?
I'm not sure what the AKA is, actually.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. I certainly remember the artwork. I think I've only seen it once, but I remember it being kind of slashery. I need to see it again. I think it's something we could probably cover on the show if memory serves.
I think so.
Nathan, have you ever seen it?
I don't know, honestly. Like, it was such a staple in the video stores when I was younger, and I rented so many movies. I don't know. I kind of think that maybe just based on the artwork and stuff, I thought it was kind of more sci-fi, and I just wasn't really into those back then. But I'm like, I would definitely watch it now. I've really kind of relaxed my boundaries when it comes to all these movies that I may not have watched back in the day. So I think that's one that I should catch up with, especially since Texas Chainsaw is my favorite movie. So I'd like to see Edwin Neal and Marilyn Burns together again.
Yeah, I think you would enjoy it. It's like, it reminds me, it doesn't have the humor of it, but it reminds me of Night of the Creeps in the way it kind of takes a couple of different genres and then kind of smashes them together and then sees what happens. And it does a pretty good job of it on a pretty low budget.
Cool. I'm very very familiar with the movie as in an abstract way, in so much just like Nathan. I remember it was kind of ubiquitous in the video stores here when I was growing up. So, but I don't think I've ever seen it. I always kind of, partly, possibly a little bit like Nathan, when I saw the H.R. Geiger artwork on the box, I was a bit kind of, this is going to be a sci-fi movie. And that may have put me off actually watching it. So I haven't seen it, but from your description, Amanda, it definitely sounds like something that I might enjoy. So I'll try and catch up with that in the next couple of weeks or so.
I will say that I read that. So this is the director, Ronald W. Moore, came from the University of Austin, and I think it's all locals probably. And I was reading on the trivia on IMDb, and I don't know how true this is, but it's pretty funny. So Edwin Neal is actually a movie poster collector, and supposedly he approached H.R. Geiger to do the artwork. But H.R. Geiger, when he wrote a biography, said that the director approached him, and the director kind of manipulated him into doing it because he cried. And he told him the only way the film would get distributed is if they could get that artwork, his artwork on it, to like help promote it. And so I think he did it because he felt bad for the filmmaker. But apparently Edwin Neal owns like the original print of it and some other stuff from H.R. Geiger. And I'm just finding this out about Edwin Neal, but I guess he's had like art installations of his movie poster art that he collects. I didn't know that.
Cool, that's pretty cool, isn't it? No, I didn't know that either. So, well, no, definitely on my radar now, Amanda. So, thank you. There's been plugging a few gaps of things that I hadn't seen, so I'll add that to the list. And you said there was something else.
Yeah, I gave a first go watch last night to the shot on video movie Video Violence from 1987, where the tagline is "When renting is not enough." And I wasn't sure what it was. I just randomly picked it because I'm going through this phase where all I want to watch when I'm watching stuff for fun are slashers, but I've seen every Golden Age slasher so often now that it just feels like, oh my God, I just saw Madman not that long ago, and I'm having a hard time finding films, and I don't really watch a lot of new stuff just for my own personal, reasons. And although I like everything I see that's new, so I don't know what that is. But so I came across Video Violence on Tubi, and I thought, you know what? I'll watch it. It's shot on video. I love shot on video regional stuff. And it was really good. It's like a movie. I thought it was going to be like an amalgamation of just like violent set pieces or something. And it ends up, I don't know if anybody's here seen it. I'm assuming Nate has. But it's about basically this town that's been so overtaken by the idea of violent imagery in film that they start to recreate it. And they're filming, like they're making snuff films basically. And this guy from New York opens up a video store. He's been there for like a month maybe. And somebody, ridiculously enough, accidentally returns a snuff film instead of the film that he rented. And so he puts it on. He can tell it's not his tape, so he puts it on to see what it is, based on his employees' encouragement. And it's the murder of the postal worker, the guy who used to be the postmaster who had retired and disappeared from town, ironically enough. And so this starts like a series of like mini investigations from the video store owner, kind of intermixed with these people making snuff films. And it was actually based supposedly on a true story that the director said he worked at a video store, and this woman came in with a baby and she wanted to rent a movie, and she asked if there was any nudity, and it was a rated R like horror film. And he said, no, it's rated R for the violent content. And she said, oh, that's okay for my kids to see. And she rented it, and he was really struck by that. So he basically made a movie about it. And I thought this was really fun. The acting's pretty good. I really like the lead guy a lot. I think his real life wife plays his wife in the film. Everybody's really spirited. It's silly. It's very well made. And I think it's just kind of an enjoyable film with some interesting commentary, surprisingly enough, about the consumption of violent imagery and that sort of, I know Justin and I have talked a little bit recently. And over the years, I know, Justin, you've talked about moral panics and stuff like that. And it's kind of feeding into that idea, in a really interesting kind of fun, silly way, but with some meat to the story. So yeah, I thought it was really good.
Again, that's another one I am familiar with, but not familiar with the, again, in an abstract way, because I know of the title, but I don't think that ever got released in the UK on tape, as far as I know. It may well have done. But Nathan, I imagine this is one that you're familiar with.
Yes, I love this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. And a lot of it does take place in a video store, and you get to see all the cool, 80s VHS. And I always think that's fun to see in movies. So yeah, it's a very fun movie. I love shot on video, so I'm probably going to love just about any shot on video, that's out there. I even love the sequel, Video Violence 2, although I will say they took any commentary or anything like that completely out for that one. But I mean, yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, and obviously they didn't have much money, and they, went for it, and, I love it. And, it was another one that the artwork in the 80s, struck me, because it's like the bloody hand putting a VHS tape in the VCR, and, that was one of those, I think it was the big box, too. They had one of the oversized boxes, which I prefer, actually. So, yeah, I'm a big fan.
Excellent. Joseph, how about you? Is one you caught back in the day?
No, I'm aware of it and the sequel, but I've still not seen it.
Okay. Could it fit inside our wheelhouse, as it were? That sounds dirty, but you know what I mean, Amanda?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think you guys would like it. It's not quite as professionally, and this actually goes into Silent Scream because one of the actors was in Blood Cult. So it's almost that professional looking, but it's not that slow. I like Blood Cult because I appreciate what they're trying to do, but it's a very slow film. This is this is like reaching that level of professionalism, but with a little bit more energy behind it. So I think you guys would find it pretty easy to watch and a lot of fun.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Amanda. Is there anything else you want to tell us about?
Well, I will say Nate contacted me the other day to tell me he started watching Beyond the Gates, which is a new soap opera, and it's not for the show, but I want to promote it. And I know Nate likes it too, so I think everybody should watch it.
What's the premise on Beyond the Gates?
It's a African American soap opera with white cast members before people get upset. There's been a lot of controversy about it in this political climate, about a family who lives in this kind of gated community. They're called the Duprees, and they're really well off, and it's just kind of about their lives and what branches off. And it's interesting. It's got a lot of different classes represented in it, but it's a really interesting show because it's not just about Black Americans, but it's got a lot of Black history in it. And so I'll just say briefly here, the first surviving film, or the oldest surviving film known by a Black filmmaker, is called Within Our Gates, which is about slavery. And then this is called Beyond the Gates, right? So obviously there's some commentary there. And it's sort of about Black excellence, but it's also about people being messy too. So it's got this idea of like affluency and success and beauty within the Black community, but also all of those trappings that you find in something like Dynasty, you know, when people have so much money that they just don't know what to do with themselves. And it's really well done. The actors are still kind of figuring out where they are. And the first week is very heavy in developing the history of the show, so you know what each character's background is. But now they're kind of settling into the story. We're going to our third week, and the energy there is so good. The sets are beautiful. The actors are beautiful. It's just really fun.
So is it a limited series, or is it like a soap, like a kind of a in perpetuation? What was the word?
Yep,
soap
it's a
opera?
full-blown daily Worlds Without End soap opera, and it's the first one that they've had on that's new in almost like 25 or so years.
Wow,
and it's a really big deal, and just Nate contacted me about it, and so I know people who like horror probably like melodrama because they're kind of the same thing, and we've talked about this before when I did fantasy, so I won't go into it, but I think people might enjoy the excess of it because some of the characters are very big, you know.
Sorry, Amanda, I'm not the biggest soap opera fan. However, on Blue Sky, you posted an image of a girl wearing this kind of it's like an orangish pink, skin tight suit. And my God, that suit was awesome. I was like, my God, maybe I need to watch this show. That girl is fire.
That actually describes her character because she's literally just like such a short fuse. And she goes in with golf clubs and just destroys offices and like people and pulls guns at weddings and stuff. She's amazing.
I might check this out then. Okay.
I mean, I was about to say, like, Amanda's caught up. I'm only like the first weekend, and we've already seen like guns at weddings, punches, addiction, affairs, attempted murder. So yeah, it's got a lot going on.
It does.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for the recommendation. So, and thank you, Amanda. Look forward to hearing what you say about our feature presentation coming up. But before we get to that, Nathan, what about you? What have you been watching?
Unfortunately, I haven't really had a lot of time to watch any movies this go around. I've just watched some comfort films, which is my go-tos, like Nail Gun Massacre, Don't Go in the Woods, the fun stuff.
Yes, with the capital F.
Yeah. I mean, I even watched Cannibal Campout, a shot-on-video movie that we've seen together, or we covered.
Did we?
Unfortunately.
I've no recollection of that at all. Was I there?
Lucky you.
Maybe I've just kind of blanked it out.
Well, that's okay. Then I'll pick it again.
I've got no recollection of that. I have to listen back to that. But selective memory syndrome there. So, nothing wrong with a little bit of self-care when it comes to horror movies. So thank you, Nathan. And Joseph, how about you?
Yeah, a couple of things, if you can believe that. I saw Companion, which it came out in January of this year, and I can't really say much about it for fear of giving things away. But it basically centers around this meet cute between this guy named Josh and this girl named Iris, who they meet over spilled oranges in a supermarket aisle, and they fall instantly in love and head up to a close friend of Josh's house for a weekend getaway, and they learn that he may have ties to the Russian mafia, and he isn't choosy about about with which female to get handsy, and he makes the mistake of assaulting Iris. And that's all I'll say, except to say I had not heard of this movie at all and was told to watch it without looking at so much as a poster, and I'm glad I did. I really enjoyed this and found it as funny as it was engaging. I mean, it's nothing thought-provoking, and if you have the slightest idea what the plot constitutes beforehand, I imagine the plot twists, and they are zingers, would probably be a little obvious with that knowledge going in, but I was lucky enough to know nothing of this, and it got me good. It maybe runs about 10 or so minutes too long past the point of the story, but man, what a fun little surprise this was, and it's a shame Erik isn't here because this is the kind of popcorn thriller I think he'd really appreciate, and I just have to mention the girl who plays Iris, Sophie Thatcher. I think she's on Yellow Jackets currently. She is just a star waiting to happen. I mean, she has excellent comedic timing and great dramatic skills, and she has, like, her looks are kind of off the beaten path from the traditional Hollywood standards. She almost looks porcelain, but she's very striking and someone you could easily see taking the reins away from, like, the Parker Posies or the Jenna Ortegas of the world. But yeah, I mean, go see Companion, especially if you know nothing about it, and keep it that way going in. It's a good movie.
Have you caught it yet, Amanda?
I haven't, but I do think Sophia or Sophie Thatcher is
Sophie Thatcher.
Yeah, she's quite beautiful. She's in Maxine, and she's different. And but what I know about her is, I guess she's like a legit horror movie fan, and she was in Boogeyman. Yes, and she did a couple other horror films, including Maxine. But I had read that when she was making Companion, she gave the director something of a mixtape to kind of get him interested in, like, what the score should sound like. And some of the music and the cues came from stuff as far-reaching as Rosemary's Baby to Cannibal Holocaust. And I was like, that's a deep dive. That's pretty cool.
Interesting.
Awesome.
Well, I caught up with it on your recommendation, Joseph. So, and I enjoyed it. But again, it's kind of like the movie. I kind of guess if you've seen the poster, you kind of get some indication which direction it's going to go in. But like you, I think it would work best if you don't know anything about it. But it's got a few twists as it goes along once you kind of realise. But it is quite cleverly put together because you kind of, if you kind of rewatch it or you think back, there are kind of clues dotted all the way through. So, yeah. So I'm sure when it's been out a little bit longer, then I'm sure we can sort of talk about a bit more about specifics. But is there anything else, Joseph?
Yeah, I also finally caught up with Hard Eyes.
Okay.
And this might be the first slasher film in a long time that I want to see again. I fucking loved it. I mean, I went in expecting more of a romantic comedy, and it is that. But it's also a bona fide slasher film with a completely convoluted motive for the killer and a very large body count on top of all the really clever set pieces and extended chase sequences. I mean, this movie is just one long chase sequence, and I love that. Like a romantic comedy, I think everything kind of hinges on love conquering all with a kind of hyper-realistic approach to unearthing those feelings of the heart, including the murders here that transpire. That may or may not be a spoiler, but I just thought everything clicked and fired on all cylinders. I mean, the two leads, they were wonderful and likable. The killer, he's taken seriously despite the film more or less existing in a super reality where death is kind of comical. And, ultimately, I just want to see this again and maybe again. It's a real crowd pleaser. It encompasses two genres and the blend works far better than I anticipated. I love this film. So a massive, massive thumbs up for Hard Eyes. I'm going to watch it again very, very soon. Easily the best film I've seen this year, even though it's still early in the year. We got to cover this at some point on the show. I mean, if maybe for next Valentine's, I'm thinking. I look forward to discussing it and its themes at length.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think I did. I have seen it. I've seen it a couple of times now. I kind of reviewed it on Hysteria Lives, and I think I gave it 4 out of 5. But before I just have a quick catch up on my thoughts on that, Amanda, have you seen it yet?
I haven't. Like I said, I have a hard time with catching up with newer films. I have heard a lot about it, and on the boards that Joe runs, somebody had written about it on there, and it made me think of that movie Audition the Asian film, but they said it's nothing like that. But that's originally what I thought when I read the synopsis. But I've heard nothing but good things about it, so hopefully I will be able to catch up with it at some point.
Cool. And Nathan, have you caught it yet?
Yeah, I think I talked about it on our last episode.
No, that's right, you did. It was Erik hadn't seen it, wasn't it?
Yeah, but just to kind of reiterate my thoughts, I loved it as well. I thought it was great. It's a great mix of rom-com and slasher.
I'll just say this. I think out of all like the Happy Death Day and the It's a Wonderful Knife, I think this is my favorite of the lot so far in that kind of style and tone. I just think this one takes the killer a little more seriously than the other films do, and it's really gory, violent fun. And like I said, the two leads are just amazing. See this movie. I loved it.
I will say that one thing that I thought was fantastic about this movie is that for a while it is just a rom-com, and when basically the other shoe drops and things go haywire, it's a very shocking, crazy moment in the film. It's very unexpected. So I loved that.
See, I didn't think it was too much of a rom-com because everyone, like some of the reviews I've read, everyone's like, it's too much of a rom-com. I thought they kept the slasher at the forefront just enough to where this is a slasher movie through and through. I mean, there's always the news broadcasts. I mean, they always cut to the killer doing something or watching through the mask, or they're talking about the killer in some fashion. So this is a tried and true slasher movie, in my opinion.
No, I would agree. I just think that the reason a lot of people say rom-com is that they spoofing, actually, I would say more in a satire way, they hit all the cliches of a rom-com.
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, for me, I rewatched it again recently in the last couple of weeks, and it didn't work quite as well for me the second time. But that's not that unusual. Once, especially like a whodunit, quite often, if you know all the answers going into it a second time, you're not on that same kind of ride. Having said that, I did enjoy it, and I think the slasher set pieces are so well done. There's a fantastic one in abandoned botanical gardens, and this kind of leads into this fairground with this merry-go-round. Which is really well done, and this kind of massacre scene at a drive-in.
I kept thinking House of Death the whole time.
Yes, I thought, I did. I was thinking House of Death, although it's slightly more accomplished, this one perhaps. And that scene in the drive-in, I thought was, incredibly well done. So it, I think it's that clever, combination of a comedy that takes the threat seriously. And that's why the Scream films, in such a large part, kind of worked, because although they were kind of a postmodern sort of satire, of maybe not a satire, but a sort of postmodern sort of look at, a slightly ironic look back at slasher movies, the killer was treated seriously, and that's why those work. And this does as well. I mean, I think what was interesting about Heart Eyes, I think when we spoke about it, perhaps originally when it first came out, it came out for Valentine's Day or ahead of a week or so before Valentine's Day, and it kind of bombed a little bit at the box office, but it's one of the few movies that are kind of made more money in its second week, which is very unusual for horror movies to do that, because horror movies traditionally are very front-loaded, especially slasher movies, that the sort of tried and true audience were going to see them regardless, and they drop off quite quickly, whereas this kind of bucked the trend and actually went from a kind of box office disappointment to actually them talking about a sequel.
Yeah. It did the same thing Scream did. Scream did the exact same thing in its first weekend, didn't do very well, and then it started gaining, traction, and that's what this movie did. And I think, I could be wrong on this, but I think it made its budget back, and I hear they are talking about a possible sequel, and I'm all for it. And I just want to mention real quick I just lost my train of thought, so I guess I won't mention it at all, but we can move on.
Well, I was just thinking they were saying that there were so many different things that they sort of romance movies they could kind of sort of pastiche or whatever, and I was thinking they could have 10 funerals and a wedding or something, something they could have so much fun as long as they kill Julia Roberts or sort of get somebody like that to come and cameo in it, or Meg Ryan. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, that's it.
Okay, right. Well, I've just got a couple of films that I caught up with. There's one that I've been meaning to watch. I've never got around to, but it's always a movie I've been curious about. And that was The Possession of Joel Delaney, which has got Shirley MacLaine and Perry King. I think it's Perry. Obviously, yes, I know Perry King's one of your one of your favourites, Amanda.
Yes.
So, because he was in, when we did Lipstick together, he was in the commentary for it.
That's
Rather
right.
than
That's right.
some kind of strange sex act. But he was in that, and this is his first role, wasn't it? And I didn't know what to expect with this. I knew it was kind of, I kind of just presumed it was a movie that came out before The Exorcist, let's say after The Exorcist, but it was actually filmed, I think, the year before. And it was a bit of a disappointment, I think, but it was kind of very, in a lot of ways, it's quite interesting, the similarity in some ways to Silent Scream, which is a film that was made before Halloween, but was viewed through the lens of Halloween during its release. And this film is a film that was kind of dwarfed by the success of The Exorcist. And interestingly enough, a bit of trivia, I didn't realise that Shirley MacLaine is in this. She turned down the role of the mother, Linda Blair's mother in The Exorcist, because she'd been in this movie. So Ellen Burstyn wasn't the original choice for that role, but yeah. So this movie was kind of a bit of it had that great sort of 70s feel to it. But is it a film you've seen, Amanda?
Yeah, I saw it not that long ago, and I can't remember why. Maybe I watched it for Lipstick, but I think it's got some. I liked it well enough, but I think it's got some really questionable images in it. The two that I remember most is I think that they have like a voodoo kind of ritual, and it seems very kind of racially charged, and could be considered cancel culture now. Like, I think that they probably wouldn't have portrayed that scene quite the way that they did. I know Shirley MacLaine stars in it, but I think for me, so I think Perry King's super hot, right? He's a very good looking guy, but also he's a very good actor, and I think he's actually underrated. Pretty much everything I've seen him in, he's really good. And when he gets roles like these, I think he's just a star. He's just a really strong actor with a lot of presence. But there's this scene at the end with the little boy, and they make him strip naked. And it was one of those things where you have to look up the actor to make sure he was okay later in life, because it feels like a really weird thing to have in a film with such a young child. And so I remember having like controversial elements to it. And I remember his performance being really good, but I don't remember all that much about the rest of the film. But I do think I liked it.
Yeah, it was kind of. I knew that it had a kind of reputation, slightly. It was a controversial movie, and obviously that scene you're talking about at the end was is just something that you would never get away with, thankfully, in movies today. So it was kind of. I thought it was kind of interesting. I didn't love it, but it had that kind of 70s grittiness of I don't know it kind of is set in the kind of sort of like slightly grimier kind of New York, as opposed to sort of the kind of slightly kind of upper class setting of the Exorcist. It had that kind of feeling of like the French Connection, those kind of movies of that early 70s. That kind of thing's a bit, New York's kind of sort of down on its luck, and there's a sense of danger there, and all that kind of thing going on there, which I thought was quite an interesting backdrop. But an interesting film, but not necessarily one I would rush to go back and see again. But Joseph, have you seen that?
Yeah, ages and ages ago. I don't remember a thing about it.
I mean, it had the kind of there was another shocking scene. It was for the in the context of the movie with this because Perry King's character, they suspect he's been possessed by this this serial killer who's died, and his body's been taken over. But there's a scene in this amazing pop art kind of sort of studio flat, well, not studio, big studio in New York City, with this amazing pop art sort of features all around the room, and then there's this decapitated woman in it, which is a very striking image. But it doesn't really go down that kind of serial killer route too much in that kind of way. There's not like a series of murders where it's going to be that kind of proto slasher thriller style thing. It was kind of, but Nathan, have you seen it? I don't know if that would be up your alley, as it were.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Okay, well, I'm fast forwarding just a couple of others. I caught up with. It's again, I've always got this thing. Sometimes I'm kind of like, after having read Fangoria religiously as a teenager, and so there were kind of a lot of films that came out in the 80s that I feel very familiar with, that I presumed I'd seen, but it turns out I hadn't. And so there were a couple of gaps in my knowledge of John Carpenter's back catalogue, especially the 80s one. And the two I just mentioned very quickly. One was They Live. which I was surprised. I thought watched because people were talking about in the context of potentially parallels to modern day events. It was I thought it was interesting, but I was surprised actually how comedic it was. It was very kind of slapstick. Which surprised me. I thought it was well done, but it kind of took me off guard a little bit. I can imagine. There was the kind of, obviously John Carpenter did, a couple of comedy films in the 80s as well, and this film sort of seemed like a kind of sci-fi horror comedy kind of mashup. So I enjoyed it for what it was, but I was surprised. I was just presuming it was going to be quite serious, but done in a kind of popcorny 80s way. But I was surprised actually kind of quite how comedic and flippant it was. And in fact, actually, how kind of fantasy-based it became towards the end. But any thoughts on They Live from anyone?
It's great.
It's a good movie. Yeah. I love Roddy Piper. I love him on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Nathan will remember him on that show.
Yes, I do.
The Maniac.
Well, the other one, which was much more horror-based, was Prince of Darkness, which came out the year before that, which was...
I think it's one of Eric's favorites.
Yeah, it's great.
And I think I realised, I don't think I had seen it before. I just presumed I had, and again, I was sure that was the Fangoria effect. And I enjoyed this one probably more than They Live, only because it was kind of slightly more into the kind of horror side of things. Although again, it was very kind of sort of fantasy based, and I had read that it was kind of had that kind of Quatermass experiment kind of feel to it, which it definitely did. This kind of group of scientists in this church, kind of investigating this kind of vial of potentially the devil inside this massive vial of green liquid, and all these homeless people outside. It's kind of recreating assault on Precinct 13 to some degree. There's definitely some nods back to that, and Donald Pleasance in it. It was fantastic. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Again, it had that kind of 80s kind of popcorny feel to it. But for me, it was a better movie than They Live. Although it was more, not necessarily better, but certainly different, and it had some kind of sort of creepy sort of aspects to it that I enjoyed. So, I'm ashamed, actually, Eric's not here to talk about it, but Prince of Darkness, I'm sure that's one that all you guys are familiar with.
Oh, yeah, it's so good. It's so cerebral and shocking. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Perry King movie, because the guy who gets the bicycle kind of lunged in him, he is Tom Bray, and he co-starred on Riptide with Perry King, and he's a legit horror fan. He and I are actually friendly, and he's really into horror, and he was in a couple of horror movies in the 80s. But I saw that in the theater, and I loved it. And I saw it recently in the theater at a midnight screening, and it's so good. It's just it's sad and it's shocking. Like that end scene is so good, and the dream sequences, and it's really thoughtful. And I love it. It's one of my probably my favorite John Carpenter film, actually.
Well, controversial, but I'll take it.
Is it? When someone's watching me is probably my favorite, but this would be number 2. Yeah.
I can't think of any others that we might be up for that award.
I know, but I like it. I like a lot of his stuff.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Well, I'm glad I caught up with those finally. So, Joseph, for you, I presume you're well aware, and you're a fan of that movie?
Oh yeah, I love it.
Excellent. And lastly, Nathan, but not least, of course.
Yeah, I do like it. I just haven't seen it in a very long time.
Well, maybe that's one that will turn up on Patreon at some point. Talking of Patreon, because obviously Erik isn't here, but Amanda is joining us for Fango Flashback, which we'll be recording after this. So if you are a Patreon member, then you can join us. And Amanda has picked Fangoria number 7 with The Shining on the front, and that may make an appearance in the episode. So yeah, if you are a Patreon supporter, then you can listen to that when that's out. And if you're not, then I'm sure Joseph will run down how you can become one soon.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's move on to feature presentation. So I think this is a kind of shorter trailer that we've got, which has got that fantastic early 80s narration over it, which very much kind of sets the scene, and very much I think it's going to be a really interesting one for us to talk about. So I'm going to play that first, and then Amanda's going to come back with a short synopsis and tell us why she picked it, and give us some thoughts on 1979 or 1980, depending on what you read, The Silent Scream or The Silent Scream. So here is a trailer.
Are you afraid of the dark, of being alone? Or are you willing to explore the unknown, holding back your fear? allowing your natural curiosity to guide you. But what if this is a nightmare, and you are its prisoner? Silent scream. When terror is so sudden, there's no time to scream.
So this is just pulled from IMDb. So their synopsis goes, during her first semester of college, a co-ed finds housing at a seaside mansion where, following the death, of a fellow student, she becomes entangled in a murder mystery surrounding the property and its secretive tenants. So my love of Silent Screamer, maybe my fascination with it might be a better phrase, goes back to when I was a kid. I don't know if anybody here went and looked up the TV spots for Silent Scream, but I've
seen them all.
Yeah, it seemed to air all the time on TV, and it's there where she's going through like the bowels of the house. So Rebecca Balding is the star of the film, and I'm probably going to gush a little about her, but she's going through the bowels of the house in the TV spot, and then there's that, she gets drugged into that room. And when I was like, I guess I would have been like 9 or so when that TV spot originally aired, it just was burned into my brain as like the scariest thing I'd ever seen. And I never forgot it. And then when I got older, I rented the film and I really liked it. But over the years, I've come to really, really love it, in part because my obsession with Rebecca Balding refuses to die. She's so amazing. And she's great in this. She's kind of a scream queen because she did this in the Boogans. In this era of her life, as well as doing a lot of episodic television, and maybe I'll talk about that in the background part. But her, I don't know where to start with this. Her wardrobe in this is amazing. Let's start there. So basically this is like it's kind of slasher adjacent would be the phrase you would use for this, because there are slasher elements in it, but it is more of a murder mystery. It is more gothic than I think some of the slashers that came out around the era that this was released. It has all the antics. It's got the young cast. It's got, some great death scenes. It's got a creepy house and secrets and things like that. It's got a final girl. But it feels definitely like it predates something like Halloween, and it's certainly not feeding into that, which makes sense because it was at least went into production before Halloween. At least the original incarnation of the film, which I just found out about the production history recently. But the movie is kind of carried, I think, by, first Barbara Steele puts in an excellent performance that has no dialogue as this woman who's living inside the house that nobody knows about. But it's also got a really energetic young cast that have a lot of energy. And I think Rebecca Balding made a really great leading lady. I don't think she did a lot outside of horror in terms of starring in films. She would sort of become like a supporting character actress throughout the rest of her career. And it's a lot of fun. It's beautifully shot. It's got some really great moments. There's this scene where they go, there's 4 teenagers, they're college students. I don't know if they're teens, like 20-year-olds or something, living in this house together. And on their first night, 2 of them had already lived there and 2 move in when the film starts. They decide to go out and get drinks and kind of get to know each other. And one of the guys gets really drunk and he's kind of pawing one of the girls, and they're coming home together through walking on the beach, and there's this high tide, so they have to kind of go around this sort of weird sand dune thing to get to the other side before the water gets too high. And she goes around, and then he never comes behind her, and it's a really great sort of done scene, and it really builds a lot of energy. And then there's those great shots that go through the house, and Barbara Steele isn't really revealed till the end, and all we see are her eyes or her hands. And it's also kind of a poignant film in her character. And we can talk about that maybe when we all start talking about the film. But it's got all these really interesting elements of like, it's not a great character study or anything like that, but it has enough like sort of human drama to make that part kind of feed my soap opera, needs. And then it's got the horror stuff that feeds my other needs. And then it's got these actors like Yvonne DiCarlo and Barbara Steele and Cameron Mitchell, and Avery Schreiber showing up to fill my love of the 70s and classic horror and Munster, all that stuff. It feeds into all these things that I love. And then it's got this woman leading the cast wearing peasant blouses that you're going to die for when you watch them. That first outfit she's wearing with the little jeans and that really great sort of crop peasant blouse with the boots. is like the greatest outfit I've ever seen in a film. That opening montage of her driving through town is so good. And she's wearing these giant sunglasses. And I have a pair of glasses sort of like that, but not quite Rebecca Balding enough. And I'm disappointed I don't have those, but she is like a fashion icon in this. She is so stunning. She's so stunning. I just love this woman so much. And I have a feeling that Justin's going to make fun of her bowl cut haircut, but
as if I would, Samantha.
You would, but I think it looks great on her, and she's my idol. So anyway, I think this is a really fun film. Is it perfect? No. Is it like a great undiscovered slasher? Maybe, but what it is it's a really enjoyable film that you can sit and watch. It takes you away for the 90 minutes that it's playing. It never outwears its welcome, with a really lively, wonderful cast, really good direction from a guy who never made another film, and it's a really worthwhile movie, and I'm actually surprised that you guys haven't covered it till now. But I think that's all I'll say now, but expect more Rebecca Balding as we go on.
Well, I would never make, thank you, Amanda, I never make fun of her haircut, especially as the fact is she survives the film, spoiler alert. And of course, that other incredible bowl cut is Alice in Friday the 13th from a couple of years later. She survives the film, although it doesn't help her obviously in part 2 where she gets killed with a nice pick through the forehead, as we know. But
in a dream sequence.
Nathan, I put it out as a poll on my Blue Sky Hysteria Lives page, and the consensus was that she was brown bread.
He is alive, and I'm going to tell you something. At one point in time, the greatest minds in the world thought the earth was flat. Okay?
Well, we'll see. Well, let's see if... anyway, this is the debate that's going to continue raging, I'm sure, for the next few...
It's like Toya versus Susie.
It is. It's never going to stop, is it? And there's no right or wrong answer apart from the evidently right answer. But we live in a very strange kind of post-truth age, so anything's possible. But back to Silent Scream. So, well, Nathan, what are your thoughts on the movie?
Oh, I really love Silent Scream. I think that I was disappointed probably when I first watched it, which was way back in the day, because I think I was expecting it to be more of a Friday the 13th style slasher, and it's not. I mean, like Amanda says, it's got, some really good, knife death scenes, and it's definitely, got all the slasher elements for sure, but it's not, I guess, in the what you think of an 80s slasher typically. It's not that. Like, it is, definitely a gothic horror precursor slasher, I guess I'd say. I loved all the characters in it, and like Amanda was saying, Rebecca Balding is fantastic in this movie. She's great, a great actor anyway, but her character is just written as being so likable and approachable. There was one scene that just really made me laugh because she says it just so like nonchalantly. She's talking to the guy she likes, who's also staying at the house, and she mentions some date she had, and then she mentions the fact that her falsies fell out, and it's just so she just says it kind of just this matter-of-fact moment, this like embarrassing situation that happened to her, and I don't know, I just thought that was a lot of fun.
Apparently that's something that actually happened to her in real life or something. That's what I read.
Oh, okay.
And she ad-libbed the line or something.
Presumably we're not talking about her teeth.
Yeah, I think that's what she's talking about. I don't know.
What, her teeth falling out?
I guess. I read the info and I heard the line, but I wasn't sure if she meant false teeth or something else, but apparently it's something that happened.
It was like a bra, like a thing you would put in your bra, or maybe the bra is meant to make you look bust, because she's very small. She's a very small person. And
I was about to say, I don't think she has false teeth.
No. She's perfect. Are you kidding me?
That would have been quite something, wouldn't it, for her to sort of get into bed with a guy and then take her teeth out and put them in a glass of water next to her.
You know what? Maybe he would have liked it that way.
Or possibly no. I have heard things about people with no teeth, but
yes,
let's not go down that road. Anything else?
Yeah. I really liked her character there, and like I said, Amanda was talking about the beach scene, and I thought it was very well done. And there's another scene, kind of in the basement laundry room, that I thought was also very creepy and a great moment. If any complaints I have would be very small. One would be the fact that we see the bodies at the beginning of the movie, because, later in the last, third of the film, the characters are wearing these clothes, so I knew, who they were because the beginning shows their bodies. So I might not have put that in maybe. And also, even though I guess eventually Rebecca Balding's character is given something to do at the end, I felt like for the most of it, they don't really give her enough to do. Like, I would have loved to have seen like a big chase scene through the house with her. And we don't really get anything like that, which is okay. I mean, it's fine. It's just something that I would have preferred to have seen. We do get a great scene where the killer's menacing her through the closet door with a butcher knife, which I thought was really good and a lot of fun. So, yeah, and, I love Yvonne DiCarlo. She's great. I loved her in American Gothic. Of course, she's also Lily Munster. But, yeah, I think all the actors were really good. A lot of fun to watch. Yeah, I'm really enjoyed it this time a lot more than I have in the past. So, yeah, 2 thumbs up from me.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's good. So 2 thumbs up. Joseph, what are your thoughts on Silent Scream?
He hates it.
Hello, Joseph.
Sorry, I was doing my Silent Scream impression. What a stupid fucking title, by the way. Does it have something to do with the mute in the attic, I'm assuming? Because it's an oxymoron, as Nathan said earlier in the week.
Yeah, I can imagine that's kind of what it was. Although the original title was The Boarding House, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had seen Silent Scream once before in the mid-'90s. I think I rented it at Videos to Go, Nathan. So I remembered very little of it going into it for the show. And I was with it for the most part, but I couldn't help but feel like the longer it went on, the more half-baked it started to feel. And then I read all the background on the film, and wow, it's actually a miracle this movie turned out as well as it did, all things considered. I love the setup with the college kids basically moving into the rooms of the house and going about their routines. I found like a coziness to these early scenes that I can't really explain beyond the bad hairstyles and the fashions and the general camaraderie between the characters. I can't really explain it beyond that. And I liked all the characters, though I must admit to being a little miffed at Scotty in regards to blowing off Doris when she was in need of someone to talk to after Peter was killed. I mean, Scotty basically just blows her off and says she needs to get to her chapters, which is fine, but she neglects her chapters to rub genitals with Jack. And Jack is a dud. I mean, Jack, he's likable enough, but he's a dud. Rebecca Balding can do better. And poor Doris, she's basically left alone in the cellar to die. And all she really needed was someone to talk to. And maybe if Scotty would have hung around a longer, she would have survived. I don't know.
Well, she didn't. I was also, just like Alice in Friday the 13th, she didn't die. She came back and did Blood Cult a few years later.
Yeah.
She's okay.
Poor girl.
A fate worse than death.
I was also a little annoyed at the obvious padding with the Cameron Mitchell and Avery Schreiber police detective characters. Now, don't get me wrong, I love both actors to death. And the characters are likable enough, but they're totally useless, and they only serve to bookend the film overall. I mean, anything important they have to say about the plot is just exposition that we can already easily ascertain by what happens at the end of the film, because Yvonne DiCarlo gets to basically repeat it in dialogue, and we see it in flashback, and then the Mason character more or less acts it all out for us. So, I mean, like, it's really showing you how useless these characters were. I mean, they're obviously added for that kind of name recognition value. I mean, we're going at a good clip along with the main characters and the intrigue in the house, and then it cuts to these two characters, and it more or less grinds things to a halt for me. And that's to say, again, I love Cameron Mitchell and Avery Schreiber. Also, what goes on in the house during the finale certainly feels like it was made up on the fly. The hidden sister character, I mean, like Amanda said, we see her eyes and like her arm, but she's not really given much of a buildup that would afford her murder spree any kind of weight, in my opinion. Despite her good performance as this psychotic mute, I think she's just kind of given short shrift in the script. And it just feels like key pieces of information is just like missing. And, again, considering they rewrote and reshot this thing after spending, nearly $500,000 already, well, I guess you can kind of understand if things go off the rails a little. Thankfully, not enough for me to, give this film complete derision. And overall, I like Silent Scream enough, but I didn't love it. I mean, there's a great movie here, I think, but it's hampered by obvious production woes. But at the same time, you know, there's also a tremendous, like Amanda said, a tremendous wealth of talent on display here. You know, and I think they did everything in their power to make sure this thing turned out as watchable as it could be. And it certainly did. So I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I'll just say I liked it.
Cool, excellent. Well, thank you. I mean, it kind of echoes my thoughts to some degree. It's a film I think is kind of misunderstood, partly because it came out obviously during the kind of the kind of gold rush after Halloween. It kind of filled a void, even though it was made mostly before. Although it's very difficult to piece together the chronology of this movie. I know it was shot mostly, or started filming in '77. And then the resultant movie that was released only used 15% of the footage that they shot. But for the life of me, I can't really work out what that 15% was, considering from what my understanding is the Yvonne De Carlo and Barbara Steele and the brother characters were not in the movie at all originally. It was a completely different kind of threat. And usually with these kind of movies, if something's been filmed a year or so later, you know, Rebecca Balding's pudding ball haircut would have changed. They would have given her like a Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween 2 style wig. So I couldn't really piece together where that was. But for me, it was. It obviously, they brought in Barbara Steele, and because they had Barbara Steele, they kind of created, I think you used the word gothic, Amanda, in your description of it. And so it was funny that you had a film like Halloween that came out in '78, which is very much forward looking. It was taking kind of a tradition of Halloween of Sam Hain and ancient things and creating a very kind of modern threat, you know, this idea, which is very kind of very late 70s, this idea of the not mysterious, but the randomness of violence that was very prevalent in the late 70s, of the birth of the serial killers, the kind of fascination with them, and the moving into that kind of time in the early 80s with the killing of America, all those kind of things. And I know the Halloween was based on that true life case in New York of the girl trying to get attention from people, from her neighbours, when she's being attacked and everyone ignoring her. So Halloween felt very modern in that way, whereas Silent Scream, and I know this is all coincidental, it very much felt it was looking backwards to the kind of more gothic stylings of certainly Barbara Steele and her kind of those 1960s movies, Mario Bava and other movies she made in Italy, where they're very kind of gothic pose style films. So it felt like when they brought her aboard, they created this thing with a slightly the twist of her being a 1950s prom queen style character who's basically been locked away in her fantasy world of the 1950s for all these years. But it's a lot of kind of cobwebs and corridors and, the monster in the attic type thing, or the monster in the basement, and all these kind of things. So it very much feels like it's kind of looking backwards at a time where but then you've got all these elements which are looking forward to the slasher movie, although of course in reality you had all these kind of post-psycho sort of proto-slashers in all the way through the 1970s. It's not the knife play of Halloween certainly wasn't a new thing necessarily, but looking at the trailer, when they cut it together, they would cut it to make it look like a Halloween style slasher movie. So it was very much a focus on people turning away from camera going, who's there, close-up shots of knives flashing in the air, all those kind of things going on. So I like Joe, for me the strongest part of the movie is the beginning of the first half, and it's a real masterclass in creating likable characters, which is something that a lot of modern filmmakers could certainly benefit from working out how to do today. So Rebecca Balding and the other characters, even the drunk rich frat boy, was a bit of an arsehole. Well, he was a complete asshole, but he doesn't last very long. But they were so likable. I could just wish they had a slightly better movie for the framing of it. I mean, as far as the two Rebecca Balding horror movies, The Boogans, it would be my go-to. Having said that, there's a lot of good stuff in this. I kind of liked I've found some things that kind of stood out. Was one thing was kind of slightly abstract jazz score, which is kind of quite unusual. Certainly, the beginning is not something you would necessarily see or hear in a movie around this time. Two other things that stood out for me. One was that I kind of appreciate the fact that presumably Barbara Steele's character escaped from a bedroom, killed the asshole frat boy, rich boy on the beach, and then built Sandcastle on top of him. A very elaborate one.
Didn't she? I thought they put the beer can on top. Yeah, I mean, she has a sense of humor.
It was a bottle of wine, wasn't it? The empty bottle of wine, whatever it was.
Yeah. I had a question, actually. If she broke out of the room to kill Peter at the beach, how did she break out? Because my understanding, Yvonne DiCarlo basically sits outside her door so she can't get out.
She busted through those boards in like that ballad of the house.
Yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know if that went anywhere else specifically. I was kind of confused about that.
It goes down to the cellar, wasn't it? I think that was the thing. So she got down into the cellar, but yeah, I just sort of thought, and also it was kind of that slightly kind of muddled in so much that he was on the beach, and then suddenly we're cutting to the police have found him. Then let's say who found him. It's just it all happens very quickly. It felt a little bit muddled that. But the other thing I thought was interesting, and one of the things that possibly played into we talk about some background. I know Roger Ebert picked this as one of his movies that he really hated around the idea of violence against women, and he was sort of saying about, he's calling Rebecca Balding's character as like this kind of forceful woman who's kind of really pushy, trying to get a room, and then is punished by being tied to a rack and menaced with a knife, neglecting to say that the majority of the violence that's inflicted or threatened against her is done by women. But I mean, that was that was all by the by. But I did think it was interesting that there was a scene in here where Rebecca Balding is having sex, and it's the kind of the penetration is also happening with the other female character is being murdered in the cellar at the same time, which is something that kind of happens quite a lot in slasher movies. And of course, it comes to that false equation of sex equals death in the slasher movie, and the kind of conservatism that came in the early 80s on the back of that. But yeah, no, there's a couple of takeaways from it, but overall I enjoy it. But it's a film that it tantalizes me with the possibilities of what it could have been, but given the fact that it's so much better than it had any right to be, considering that it was pretty much reshot and rebuilt from ground up, which is usually a recipe for absolute disaster. But it's amazing how well they managed to match everything together.
I want to mention real quick the beach scenes. They gave me a vibe of The Slayer a bit, especially the scene with Peter being killed and buried under the sand. Really reminded me of the crab scenes in The Slayer, especially shots of the house as well, like on that cliff, has reminiscent of The Slayer's house and Tybee Island. I thought there was a lot of good imagery parallels there, even though The Slayer came out a little later. But yeah, I thought this movie would pair well with The Slayer, I think.
Yeah, although The Slayer for me is very much the movie about isolation, isn't it? It feels very much like you're kind of isolated. With
I think it's a better movie, honestly, but
Yeah, arguably, yes. I mean, I think Silent Scream was lucky in a lot of ways for when it came out. It hit the, we talk about quite often about sort of why movies succeed and sometimes they don't. I mentioned recently talking about something like Scream 4 and why that wasn't a big success because it didn't really come out at the right time, as far as kind of grabbing an audience attention or being having nostalgia enough for previous films and all these kind of things. Whereas Silent Scream, when it came out, it kind of just accidentally came out, just as like you had an audience that was ravenous for more kind of Halloween style thrillers, and so that really benefited the movie. But yes, so I mean, is it, Amanda? I'm sure you've got more thoughts, but I don't know if you want to put those into context with some background, or I don't know if anything else you wanted to say.
Well, two things. They're both based off Joe's comments. One, I want to talk about Rebecca Balding, but first, and that scene in the basement at the laundry machine, because it's such a Balding move for her to do what she did in there. But also this idea of double featuring. And while you guys were talking about this, I was remembering, so there was a movie that came out a few years before this called Mansion of the Doomed, I think, with, oh my God, Richard Basehart and Lance Henriksen. And I read a really interesting review of that film that so I don't want to go too into the film, and I don't remember it all that well, but like there's this doctor who's like taking out people's eyes, and he's trying to give his daughter sight back. And so he lives in this mansion, and in the mansion, everything looks really beautiful and very organized and well laid out and clean. And then you go into the basement where he's keeping all these people whose eyes he scooped out, sort of in these cages and stuff. And the reviewer talked about how the film was actually, because it was sort of straddling between the old classic horror being mid-70s and then coming into this new age of horror where things were more violent, and saying that the two floors were sort of metaphorical for that. And while Joe was talking about that, I was thinking about that Mansion of Doom might be a good double feature with this, because it has that same idea that within the body of the house, everything looks normal, and feels like a kind of a gothic melodramatic film. But then when you get to the attic or into the bowels of the house, you have this slasher film. And it's kind of like straddling again, that idea of like taking classic horror, but also trying to look ahead at what's coming. So just to throw that out there. But Rebecca Balding for me, so I'm obsessed with her because she, came to my attention in the late 70s when she was cast on Soap as Carol, and she played the woman who infamously basically raped the gay character and got pregnant by him and then stole his baby, right? And so she played this very, very aloof, hard, kind of scary. As small as she is, she was very menacing on the show, you know, and she did awful things to the Jodie character played by Billy Crystal. And she terrified me in a lot of ways. And so later when I would come to watch her in these horror movies, I think she's really warm in them, but she always does something that's very Balding of her. And she always plays this kind of aloof character. She was actually on a Family Ties where she played Elisa's boss, and she had that same kind of, she was nice, but you were like kind of afraid of her. And so in this movie, when she goes into the basement, it's so great because the Doris character is like, could you just stay with me for a while? You know, Peter got killed yesterday and I'm feeling really, really weird about it. And she just looks at her and she goes, I really need to study. And then she like leaves, and then she goes and has sex with this guy, and I'm like, such a Balding move.
I'm like, I know, I love Scotty so much, but I can't forgive that moment. No, I can't.
The way she says it. So in the Boogans, which is her warmest character that I've seen her, she is investigating the mines in that film, and she goes to this like archive, and there's this woman running it, and this woman's telling her, oh, you're a journalist, you should write about the women who did journalism here in this little town. I would think I was the first paper girl and whatever. And she's telling her this story that she thinks is interesting to Rebecca Balding, and Rebecca Balding looks at her and nods and goes, the story's about the mine. And I'm like, oh my God, she just Baldinged her all over town. And so like there's just this thing about her that's like kind of scary to me that I'm really drawn to. She plays really interesting, strong characters, but that could be really menacing. Here, not so much, but she has these moments where you're like, oh yeah, that feels like the Rebecca Balding I was introduced to on Soap. So I'm just forever in love with her. She's so fascinating to me. And she's done lots and lots of stuff.
A horrible person on Soap.
Yes.
Her character is like so despicable, but she plays it really well.
Yeah, she's a really fantastic actress, and she would go on to do other things, but like just Carol always sticks in my mind, you know, with her. And then I see her in these horror movies, and I'll just notice these moments where she reminds me of Carol. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I feel that so deeply. But I had no idea that this movie had such an interesting production, and I might be able to clear up a couple of things in terms of what not so much the story, but there's a bunch of casting notices that showed up in 1977 that did not end up in the film, and so I'll go through those. But so I just pulled this off IMDb, and then I pulled something off DVD Beaver that I think will help explain some of this patchwork stuff. So on IMDb, in their trivia section, they just wrote, the film was originally shot in the summer of 1977. However, the original version was considered unreleasable. Director Denny Harris turned to screenwriters Jim Wheat and Ken Wheat to help improve the story, but they had the radical idea to reshoot the bulk of the film. The actors and actresses who played the college students were brought back for reshoots in March of 1978. Yvonne DiCarlo, Barbara Steele, Cameron Mitchell, and Avery Schreiber were all brought in during reshoots for name recognition value, replacing the actors who originally played their roles. In the end, only 12 minutes of footage from the original version was retained in the final finished film. So DVD Beaver kind of broke it down here. And the reviewer of the Blu-ray or DVD wrote, originally shot in 1977, Silent Scream was actually a patch-up job in which the Wheat brothers constructed a script around usable footage from a 1977 Denny Harris project. Among those recast for the new script was DiCarlo, Mitchell, Schreiber, and Reardon, along with several characters being reconceived or written out. The filmmakers discovered it would be cheaper to build new sets on a soundstage and shoot even more footage since commercial director Harris owned his equipment for the same amount it would cost to re-rent and ensure the old house location. While they made use of some interior footage from the original house, they found different, more atmospheric house in Highland Park, which I will talk about here in a minute. Had the film been released earlier, Silent Scream might have taken the place of John Carpenter's Halloween as the origin of the late 70s, 80s slasher craze, despite antecedents like Black Christmas. Although the Carpenter film took such dangers to the suburbs, while Silent Scream retains the gothic horror elements with its atmospheric seaside mansion setting. So, the production did start around October 31st, 1977, but notice of Rebecca Balding's casting didn't actually get reported until November of that year, with another note saying filming began in November, not in October as originally reported. Another notice said September 15th, 1978, which makes sense since Avery Schreiber wasn't even brought on until April. Barbara Steele and Yvonne DiCarlo were cast in May of 78 as well, and it was announced to be shot in San Diego, and I'm not sure it was. I mean, I know the exteriors were shot in Los Angeles, and I'll talk about the Smith house. It was actually used for Spider Baby as well. And another location they used was Occidental College, which is also in LA. But so I have some casting notices from the Hollywood Reporter that say that a woman named Diane McBain was cast originally in Silent Scream. Now, I was guessing she was cast in the Barbara Steele role, because she was a little older and she was best known for playing bad girls in the 1960s, but I don't know that character existed in the original script. I don't know. Interestingly enough, Murray Langston, who you would best know as the Unknown Comic, was also cast, but doesn't appear in the movie. According to the Hollywood Reporter, this would have been his feature film debut, but that would turn out to be Skate-Town, USA, which originally screened in 1977. Another bit of casting, I saw tons of people cast, but I only took a few names down. Another bit of casting that didn't work out was Lorene Tuttle from Psycho. She played Mrs. Chambers, which would have been interesting. She did end up making 2 horror movies in 1979, though, and that was Clonus Horror and Human Experiments. And this was Steve Dobey's big film. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He plays Balding's love interest. He was primarily at this point working in guest spots at this time. And of course, we mentioned Julie Andelman, who plays Doris. She would go on to star in Blood Cult. This is the director's only film. I read that he liked working with Rebecca Balding so much that he had signed her on to make 3 more films, but no more films were in his future, unfortunately. And that would have been great to have seen. But so it's interesting to talk about the Smith estate, which is also known as El Mio or My House. It was also used, as I mentioned, Spider Baby, but it was used for Insidious Chapter 2. It was built in 1887, and it was the original person was not named Smith, who lived in the house, but he was a judge who wrote books on the occult. Some of his book titles were Scientific Occultism, The 20th Century Christ, The Blood of the Gods, and Textbook of Christian Hermit Philosophers. So the Smith house is located somewhere in Los Angeles. I've been to it. So Bill Ackerman, who you've had on the show, and when we did the Fatal Games commentary, we flew out to LA to record there in Redondo Beach where they made the film. And the next day he took me out on like a location tour, and we went to all these different places, like where they shot parts of Messiah of Evil. We went to the Garden Shop in Mortuary. We went to the Bad Ronald house, and we went to this house. And what's really interesting is it's not near an ocean. It's not on a cliff. I think it's sandwiched between 2 other houses. I can't remember, but there's a lot of properties around it, and it doesn't look nearly as big as how it looks in the film. And they did a really good job of like making it seem like it was where it's located in the film. Like you never get this idea that it's just in a suburban street. And that it's not on a cliff and all by itself. So that was like the really fascinating aspect of it. And so Bill and I have a great love for this film that goes back, I think, to when we first started hanging out, when we did the Last House on the Left commentary. I think after we recorded that, he came over to my house and we got drunk and we watched Silent Scream. And ever since then, it's kind of been our film. And we're both big fans of it. And I don't know if he's a huge fan of Rebecca Balding, but I am. And you may be interested to know that when she made The Boogans, that's where she met James L. Conway, who was the director, and they fell in love, and she proposed to him, and they got married during the production of that film. And they stayed married until she passed away just a couple of years ago, which was heartbreaking for me. I found out that in the later years of her life, she retired, and she actually ran an Etsy store called Becky's Bauble Boutique, and I wish I'd known that because I would have bought everything that she had on her site. I mentioned this about Denny Harris. So you may recognize the names Jim and Ken Wheat, who went on to rewrite the script, because they would write Pitch Black, the Riddick Chronicles of Riddick film, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Fly 2, Birds 2, Land's End, and many, many others. The original writer, Wallace C. Bennett, wrote Welcome to Arrow Beach, which I'm not sure you guys have covered that film, but it might be good for your Patreon. It's a really interesting film. It might be a proto-slasher of sorts. It's a pretty...
Meg Foster one?
Yes.
Yes,
about the cannibal. It's really good. It's really good. So the film would find distribution in October of 1979. So it took like 2 years to get it to where it ended up. I don't know when it originally came out on VHS, but I know Video Treasures released it, I think, for sale in July of 1988. I have a couple of reviews. You might have these, Justin, but I think Monthly Film Bulletin didn't like the movie. They wrote, with Mad Sister and the Addict and an old movie star cast as the sinister landlady, Silent Scream plainly belongs to a much older genre of horror than Halloween and its ilk. As such, it's a workmanlike job with an unusually personable quartet of college kids as the victims, although there's not exactly a wealth of incident nor even much mystery attached to their murders. Minutes before the event, one is in no doubt as to who will be the next to go, and among the suspects, Mason the weirdo drooling over TV violence and his dead father's possessions is a scarlet herring. Scotty's exploration of the secret passage to Victoria's room, however, has been put together with impressive care for pacing and atmosphere, and the climax is undeniably gripping. Okay, so mediocre review there. Los Angeles Times called it trite but scary. Variety loved it. They wrote, a group of vulnerable youngsters imperiled by a homicidal maniac in a spooky house is not the freshest of frameworks. Nevertheless, Denny Harris's moody, menacing direction and a solid cast combined to make Silent Scream a real chiller that should perform solidly on the Shriek circuit. Box Office compared it to Phantasm, of all things, in terms of how it uses blatant gore and bloody violence to evoke screams from the audience, which is what they wrote. Screen International called it a promising debut. So that's pretty much all I have about the film. There is a featurette on the Blu-ray, which I wish I have the Blu-ray and I would just watch it on Tubi, but it's called Silent Scream, the original script. And that might go into more depth about some of the changes that happened. And I think Rebecca Balding and the director maybe, or the Wheat brothers are on that featurette.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Amanda. It's your encyclopedic knowledge and research skills are second to none. So wonderful. Thank you. Nathan, I imagine you have just as much again?
The only stuff I had written down was surrounding Rebecca Balding, and that's, pretty much been covered.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, I enjoyed it because you mentioned some stuff I didn't know.
Excellent. And, well, thank you, Nathan. Joseph, what about you? Have you got any nuggets?
Yeah, just a couple things. Amanda, you mentioned the VHS. Which one did you mention? You mentioned the Video Treasures one in 88. Did you mention another one?
No, that's the only one I found when I was going through the trades.
This came out on VHS and beta in 1982 by Media. I actually had the Media VHS at one point. I don't think I ever watched it, but most of the background I have is basically what you went over with them, basically filming two movies across 1977 to 1978. I do know the director put up $450,000 of his own money because he really wanted to make this movie. And I think from what I understand, he just wanted to make one movie and that's it. I don't think he actually wanted to make another movie. So, who knows? Also, the actor who played Peter, apparently he was the voice of the Chuck E. Cheese mascot, at least the original iteration of it. And I had no idea. That's kind of cool. Avery Schreiber, who plays Manny, he was cast in one of my favorite episodes of The Dukes of Hazzard because of his stark resemblance to Oliver Hardy from Laurel and Hardy. And that's about it for me. Seriously, everything Amanda had, I had written down, so she's already went over it.
No problem. Well, thank you. I just got a couple of bits. One bit to sort of just bounce off the information you had, Amanda, about Diane McBain and her role in the movie.
Yes.
I read that she was actually cast originally as the police detective, presumably that Cameron Mitchell his character was as an actor sort of reshot that, and she said that for whatever reason, I think I read somewhere that it was because they didn't buy the fact that she was convincing enough, but I don't know if that's the case. But so she was originally going to be the detective investigating the murders. So her kind of scenes were completely got rid of. A few other bits was before I do that, I just sort of mention some of the reviews, because I found a few kind of newspaper reviews from the time, but just to put them in context, because as we mentioned, the film, I think it was released in late '79 in a kind of limited amount of screens, and then it was quite successful because, again, Halloween was a massive success, and also it was there were revival screenings of it regularly through the late '70s and early '80s, and so there was this kind of like void. Films that people were looking for thrillers that were very similar to Halloween, and of course Friday the 13th didn't come out until the summer of June 1980. So you had this kind of period between the release of Halloween, going from a sleeper hit to this big, massive kind of hit through the early part of 1979 and through 1979 after its original release in late '78. So this film was in the right place at the right time. And as I mentioned about how if you look at the trailers have been cut to make it look like a Halloween type film. And that was the way that it was reviewed by many critics at the time, with many of them accusing it of ripping off Halloween. Of course, the irony is we've already talked about it. It wasn't. It was made before Halloween, so it was all coincidental. But certainly, part of the reason for a success, and it was very successful. I think it was one of the most successful horror movies released in 1979. I know it got a cinema release in the UK and in France and other places, so it definitely rode on that wave. But some of the other reviews, bits and pieces I picked out, was the Arizona Republic review said, and some of them, there's a mixed bag here, but said Silent Scream is so bad it's not even campy. We said it was poorly written, under-directed, and listlessly acted, and said the high point was the eating of a sandwich. Now, I don't remember.
Under-directed, no.
But I don't. No. Do you remember a sandwich scene?
No.
Oh, I don't.
I mean, they go in the kitchen, but she gets the beer. I love also that when they're having the sex scene and she's sitting on the bed with the guy, and she takes that big swig of beer, and then she kisses him, and it's like, there's still beer on my lips.
I kept wondering, sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the Mason character, I kept wondering how he was watching the TV, because it didn't appear to be plugged in at all. He just picked it up, moved it across the room, and it was on.
Yeah.
And they originally shot, I think, the footage that he's watching in like that rape scene, I think that was made for the movie,
the original
right?
footage for the original Silent Scream that they shot. Apparently someone gets raped in that version.
I don't know, it looks rough.
But that's footage from that original version, yeah.
No, it could well be. I mean, that certainly would be. It's something that filmmakers have done quite a few times, haven't they? Especially directors have quite often showed their own films on television, and sometimes show other people's, like an in-joke, like they did in I think it was a Nightmare on Elm Street, where she's watching Evil Dead, or there's all those kind of things going on. But so just a couple of other bits. A critic in the Daily Press said in May 1980, and so this film was kind of rolling out. I imagine it did kind of a bit of a regional rollout. I know it got released in California and was very successful in the early parts of 1980, but it was obviously rolled out throughout the year, and was much more positive. Said it was a real thriller, but said it wasn't in the same league as When a Stranger Calls or Psycho, but said it was an awfully good horror movie that will give you plenty of thrills and chills. Said Balding was outstanding, and Yvonne De Carlo gave a brilliantly subdued performance. And one of the things actually I noticed about the movie also is about talking about subdued, is actually there's very little dialogue in the movie. There's long passages throughout the movie where no one's saying anything. The reason because I was obviously listening out for dialogue to the intro, and I was thinking, I was about 3/4 way through thinking, I haven't actually got that much, because nobody's actually talking. Well, they are, but it's quite sparsely used. So the critic in the Fort Lauderdale News in June of 1980, so obviously moved down to Florida in the summer of that year, said it was passable, but for only die-hard horror fans. But again, well, praise Barbara Steele's performance. And the last one was Kathy Huffman in the Mason Valley News, said it was a fairly well done thriller and a cut above most films in its genre, unlike the ridiculous Friday the 13th. So, yeah, so it was, but some of the other critics I saw were saying that it was a carbon copy of Halloween and things like that. So, you know, as we mentioned, it's just kind of, it's a happenstance, but the fact is that the movie was a success. I think, you know, if it had been released in 77 or before Halloween in 78, it probably wouldn't have had the kind of the cachet and success it did have. It was a fun little movie, but, you know, I think it was in the right place at the right time.
Just one other brief piece of trivia. It was on IMDb, but I thought I'd mention it here because I think Joe mentioned that it was like people really wanting to make a good film and stuff. And so Rebecca Balding, you know, because it took a while to film the film as we know it now. Apparently, the nail polish she wore in the original shoot went out of production, and she had a really hard time matching the color exactly to the reshoots. And I think that's so interesting that she went out of her way to like really be particular to get it close enough so that everything.
I read that as
seamless.
well.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I read that as well, and I was thinking I never really even paid attention to her nails, so I didn't even notice. So good job.
Excellent. Well, what was the consensus on the group, Joseph? I'm curious.
14 comments overall for Silent Scream. Our numbers are starting to climb again. I like it. Still a work in progress, but here are the top 3 from our listeners. Leo Dean says, love, love, love this movie. Great atmosphere. The trailer alone scared me as a 12-year-old kid. And when I saw it in the theater, it definitely got to me. And that cast, what a lineup. Rebecca Balding, Barbara Steele, Yvonne DiCarlo, and Cameron effin Mitchell. What's not to love? Noel, who just recently joined us on our episode for the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, writes, this might not have been intended, but it feels like the film is demonstrating the clash between different eras of horror. The ordinary kids in a realistic setting are menaced by an avatar of another era/genre of horror films, gothic, stylized, neurotic in brackets, hidden in the metaphorical basement/attic, itself a gothic trope. Martin from 1977 and Hell Night from 1981 do the same kind of thing, although in Hell Night the kids are simulating Camp Gothic, and in Martin, the killer imagines he's actually in a Hammer-style film. In all cases, the clash leads to a gruesome body count. Targets from 1968 is the most explicit version of this theme, although that's not really a slasher in the conventional sense, but it's still worth examining. Thank you, Noel, for that insight. And last but not least, Simon Logan.
Oh.
That's Simon.Logan. He says, more rooted in 70s family psychodrama than the 80s slashers which would follow, a little less time spent on slow jazz makeout sessions, and more on the kills might have made this a better watch. With that said, the performances were pretty charming, even if both Yvonne DiCarlo and Barbara Steele were criminally underused. But overall, it just felt a little bit too low energy to be anything more than mid-tier. But hey, at least we got to see Cameron Mitchell being entirely useless yet again.
Was this Cameron Mitchell's first kind of foray into low-budget slasher movie making?
No, that would be the Toolbox Murders, right?
Toolbox Murders,
yeah. Of course.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But then he went into, I mean, the Demon was around this time, wasn't it? Sort of, and then
79.
Yeah. So he kind of went on, did quite a few of them, didn't he?
Yeah. Follow us on Blue Sky at THC-podcast. Listen on Patreon and YouTube to help support the show, or listen wherever you catch your pods if you just want to listen. Write to the show via the Hysteria Continues at gmail.com with movie-related and general feedback. If all of that sounds like too much to remember, just search our name. You'll find us. Over to you, Justin.
Okay. Well, as you know, I'm obviously I've already said to Amanda we're not going to put on the spot with Joke of the Week. So I think we just.
But here's the thing. So I went ahead. You guys did an episode where Erik put into Chat GPT, give me a joke on a movie.
Oh yeah.
And so I did it in AI, but the problem is it's giving me a different joke now. But the first joke was funnier because it gave me a joke that didn't make any sense. And then AI actually wrote underneath, this is why the joke works. And then it explained why the joke worked. And I can't get it to pull up the same joke, but it did give me another joke if you want to hear it.
Well, let's go for it.
It's my joke of the week. It's so fantastic.
So this one didn't give me a why the joke works, so I don't know why this joke works, but here you go. Why did the character in Silent Scream cross the road? Because she was trying to escape the silent scream of the killer, but she ended up in a silent scream of a different kind. Funny.
I don't get it.
It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. And the other joke didn't either, but at least they broke it down. They said, this is why it's funny.
So it's not a sound we normally hear when Erik tells a joke. The sound of clapping and laughing. So
Thank you.
Well, it does. It has a certain something to it. That joke.
A certain something, yeah. Certain something.
No, well, thank you, Amanda, for doing that, because I wasn't going to put you on the spot, but you pulled through with that. So
I came prepared.
You came prepared, indeed. So, well, we've got a little bit of feedback as well. We've had quite a few feedback things through, so we are spreading them out. So if you have sent us yours and you haven't heard it yet, you are on the list, and we will get to you. So, but Nathan, you've got one for us, haven't you?
It says, hello, fellas. Lou from Boston. Been a while, so I figured I would write in. Currently listening to your commentary for Dead Girls. You are the best thing about the disc, as usual. I see your latest episode is Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I have not listened yet, but my thought is immediately Nathan saying, oh, God, I hated that Crimmy, and Justin saying, hold my wine. On a sad note, my cat passed away recently. Oh, sorry to hear that, Lou. Mentioned it because you guys are such a cat-friendly podcast, but also I have had a Hysteria Continues couch pillow for years, and my dearly departed furry friend slept many a night on it, so he will forever be connected to you guys in my mind.
Aww.
That's very sweet.
Mm.
You guys continue to be a port in the storm of the world. Thank you for all you do. Your podcasts have become so beloved to me. One more thing. Nathan Pick, in quotations, has entered into my personal lexicon. When suggesting a movie for movie night with my girlfriend or friends, I may say, it's a Nathan Pick, but give it a chance. I want to express this as a stamp of approval. To me, a Nathan Pick can be made for $1 as long as it's not boring. That is the magic of a Nathan Pick. I think there is a secret brilliance to Nathan's open-minded approach to cinema. You guys rock hard, oh matron. Lou from Boston. I really appreciate that, Lou.
Well, thank you, Lou, and sorry to hear about your cat. So, but thank you for writing in. I've got one here. Hi, guys. I really enjoyed the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari episode. It was certainly a title I was familiar with but had never seen. I found it extremely entertaining, and seeing some of the genre's most well-known tropes used here when they still had their new cast scent was fascinating. I need to go back and rewatch 1962's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari with Dan O'Halloran. So I'm reading this at a side angle, so I'm kind of trying to make up some words here. As the Doctor, and
we're so professional.
I know exactly. Well, I need to get with like one of those in the movies you see when they're like a spy thriller and they're looking at all those screens and everything's flashing up, and you got Tom Cruise uses his fingers to make things pop up, as it were.
And the screens are taller than he is.
Yeah. And he says also the 1989's Dr. Caligari to see how they may tie in. Now, I think, funny enough, I did look up the 60s Cabinet Dr. Caligari. It didn't look like it had anything to do with the original, and so I got a feeling, I may be wrong, that it was just they can use the name. But I think Dr. Caligari, the 1980s one, I imagine that could be a Nathan pick. Have you seen that, Nathan?
No, but I want to.
Well, that's something for us to look into. So, catching up on past podcasts, I've watched many titles you guys have mentioned that I was unaware of. Good, Bad, and Ugly. I thought Axum. Oh, thank goodness Erik isn't on the podcast, because I might send him into one of his fainting fits, because obviously Axum was the movie that he almost left the podcast over. But luckily, the writer agrees. He said Axum was horrible, but I still found it more enjoyable than, say, Rob Zombie's Halloween. So controversial, but I probably agree with you. It's more of an achievement to create something from nothing than it's to create nothing with millions of dollars and an army of professionals. So all all shade there, but I think I'm living for it. So I have a secret slasher shame. I saw you guys did a commentary for Savage Water, and I wanted to see it since you first mentioned it. I noticed the disc was quickly discontinued, so I went to eBay. While I'll never admit what it cost, I found it enjoyable as the missing half of 1981's Scream. This is the rafting footage they forgot to put in Scream. I enjoyed it more than the other film on the disc, Death by Invitation, and it was better than Axum, even though it didn't have many Yo Mama jokes. So that was Savage Water was our very, very first commentary, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was. And also Invitation to Murder was our second ever commentary, which we never speak of to this day for reasons.
Oh, I just want to mention, sorry, Justin, if you are listening to this and you haven't heard that Savage Water commentary, it is available on our Patreon feed, so you can go listen to that. And I think I set it to free for all, so it's available online. Vinegar Syndrome said, yeah, just take it back.
Yeah, because to put it into context, there was some kind of kerfuffle, wasn't there, with the rights holders that they weren't able to release it. Well,
apparently, my understanding was like they got permission to release it, but then the director more or less just changed his mind and said, no, I want to do a different type of release. And so Vinegar Syndrome discontinued and said, okay, I think we're going to work together again on another release, and then nothing ever came of it. So that movie's lost for a second time.
Yeah. So maybe some people may say for good reasons. But just to finish off, have you guys caught up with the retro slasher flicks? The third Saturday in October, part 5, and the third Saturday in October. They were shot in Alabama, one town over from where I live. The filmmaker made part 5 first to recapture the time when he was a kid renting horror tapes, and sometimes he would get into a series in one of the sequels before seeing the original. He approached the original as a prequel. To watch them in the order of part 5 first, then the original is a nostalgic good time. They're not big budget productions by any means, but he achieved what he set out to do. They're fun and can be found on Tubi. Nathan Joseph will be able to confirm the weirdness that surrounds Southern college football and how the towns will shut down on the big game days. A perfect opportunity for a psycho to rack up a healthy body count. And that's from Rob Fries, who is a regular writer in. So thank you, Rob. Now, those movies, I did see them. I did start watching one on Shudder a while back, but for whatever reason, I didn't get into it, so I didn't pursue it. But I'm curious. So, Nathan Joseph and Amanda, indeed, have you seen any of those movies?
What are they called again?
It was the third Saturday in October, part 5, and the third Saturday in October.
I've never heard of them, but I can confirm that we are very weird in the South about football.
Yes, we are.
I mean, for me, it's kind of those kind of retro horror movies. Sometimes, I'm not saying with these because I've not watched them, but sometimes it feels that people do put all the effort into trying to recreate a look of it and not always doing it particularly well. I mean, I think you get certain films like House of the Devil, which look fantastic and are good films as well. But quite often when people try and do like a low-budgeted retro slasher movie, they don't quite hit the kind of the fashion, and also they don't necessarily hit the kind of thing that made those slasher movies so special in the first place. Partly is those kind of likable characters. That's not to say there are some that have done it well, and I can't speak to these movies because I've not kind of really given them a chance, but maybe I'll give it another go. But Amanda, do you find that with those kind of retro horror movies?
Yeah, I find that with retro, movies in general. I really like The Wedding Singer, but sometimes you feel like there's like a little bit trying too hard to like look like the era it was made in. Do you know what I mean? And that can really take you out of the film.
The problem is like everybody nowadays thinks that everyone in the 80s always wore neon, and that's not the case. Everyone just wore kind of beige and brown and just plain colors, and they just dressed up on the weekends like that. I think a lot of these movies think that everyone dressed like that all the time, and I think that's where I pick up on it.
But I think it's kind of it's always been the case when not so much in modern big budgeted sort of movies, kind of period movies, but certainly you look back at the 1960s and those kind of biblical epics, or like Cleopatra or something with Elizabeth Taylor, not quite the beehive, but she looks, they've all got the kind of the big false eyelashes and the 1960s makeup and stuff. So it is a kind of, there is all, especially when you're away from that time and look back, you can definitely see the period a film was made. I certainly would like a low budget sort of sci-fi, UK sci-fi, like Blake Seven or Doctor Who or whatever. Everyone looks like they're dressed. It's something like Logan's Run as well. It looks it's the 1970s, mid 1970s as sci-fi.
It's all kind of a moot point anyway, because no matter what they do to kind of recapture that time period, like they can dress people up, they can coif their hair, they can put in the music, but if they don't have the right film stock, it's still not going to match. Yeah. And they just don't have that right film stock today. I mean, no one seems to have that film stock available. So I'm always going to notice that. I mean, it stands out big time.
Indeed. Well, I think we're kind of considering we're also going to be able to record our Fango number 7. I think we're going to wrap this up, but it's one of our longest, so hopefully Erik will get to hear it in that prison radio.
In his prison,
yeah.
Very quick before we end, I don't want to end on a downer or anything, but I had set up a GoFundMe for my dog that had passed away and his medical expenses, and a lot of people I noticed that donated were fans of the show. So I just wanted to say to all you guys, I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your generosity. That's very touching, and sorry to hear about Axel. Nathan, obviously.
Poor old Axel.
Thank you. He was a good boy.
Dog.
He was a good boy.
Yeah, he was cool.
So, okay. Well, Erik's not here. So, and I think I've been very kind to Erik, considering, really. I mean, in the past episodes when Erik's not been here, I've been much ruder about him. But...
well, there's a lady present. You have to be a little civil.
Well, exactly, yes. And also, I mean, there's this kind of this narrative that I'm this big bully and Erik's this poor little victim, which anyone who's ever seen
all they have to do is read our conversations and they'll see that Erik is the bully. Trust
exactly.
me.
Yes, I know.
Whoa, that's scandalous.
It is scandalous, but it's
scandals behind the scenes.
Sometimes you see on those reality TV things when they kind of somebody leaks a conversation between two people and it goes all over Twitter or whatever, X or whatever it is, or Blue Sky. So if
cat is out of the bag.
Yeah, so if those kind of any of those kind of screen grabs were leaked, I think people would see who the real bully is.
Although, Justin, to be fair, you do pick at Erik sometimes.
Only to keep him on his toes, really.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think Erik is enjoying a cocktail of some kind at the moment. So especially considering
ponytails and cocktails.
Yes, especially as considering the kind of messages he's been sending us, I think there may be a few. He might be having a séance or raising a few spirits of some kind. But what is he covering next time?
He was able to smuggle a note out of the prison walls, and it looks like we'll be covering the 1973 SF Brownrigg film, Don't Look in the Basement.
And I think I said I got confused. No, it was the one I mentioned, wasn't it? Or was it because you came up with a song, didn't you? It was the Ramones song, wasn't it?
Yeah, I kind of stole it, not knowing that Erik had picked that. For the closing song I picked, I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement by the Ramones, even though she's in the attic mostly. I picked that, and then I was going to try to pick something else, but I just didn't have time.
Well, that's okay. We'll play out with the Ramones. The Ramones are always a good time. So, well, thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much.
It's not goodbye. It's au revoir, because we'll be talking in 5 minutes when we cover Fango 7. So, but thank you for stepping into Erik's shoes. It's a wonderful actually to work with a professional for a change. So, it's been marvelous. Thank you so much.
Can I just mention something here briefly? And it's only kind of a little bit of shameless self-promotion, but I want to say something after that I hope your listeners will take to heart. So I was nominated for a Rondo. You guys were nominated as well for Best Podcast. And I was nominated with Justin and my friend Heath and my other podcast partner, Dan, for our Martian Chronicles commentary. And I want everybody to vote for the Hysteria Continues because you guys deserve it. But also, Justin, I was thinking about all the work you do, and I really think you should be in the Monster Kid Hall of Fame. because you're like the best resource for these kinds of films. And so if people get this far into this episode and hear that, I think that they should write you in.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Well, hopefully we'll get some Rondo love this year. But I keep on imagining Erik in this prison, but it's kind of like he's kind of like a cross between Divine and some in drag, but in like some Lucio Fulci's late 80s thing like Enigma, and he's having this psychic connection and he's shouting bastard and all these, he's got these sound clips going off. But
Yes.
we'll let, when he's back next time and he's taking us down into the basement, then he can get his own back. So, okay, well, we'll play out the Ramones, and thank you, Amanda, and we'll be recording again shortly. But thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed our trip back to the Silent Scream, and we'll be back next time when Hysteria continues. So thank you for listening, and say goodbye to the good people.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
I want